The purpose of this video is not satire and it's not self-pity. A lot of what people have to say about this on YouTube, it's fundamentally self-centered, self-indulgent, self-pitying short-term thinking. And what this video is about is really a very positive message about how you can make your own life better, thinking long-term about who you want to be, how you want to live your life, and how you're going to include other people in it. And I mentioned satire for a reason. A lot of these videos, it's a struggle to separate to what extent this person is trying to be a kind of embittered stand-up comedian, like talking about their own heartbreak or talking about something that happened to their sister or their best friend, to what extent is this social commentary? To what extent is this social satire? And to what extent are you getting really serious, really useful first-person reflections? You get the person really telling you how they think you should live your life and how they're going to live their own life. To what extent are we dealing with the problem itself in earnest? And many of these videos, even if they're made with the best of intentions, it strikes me that the people uploading them aren't seriously reflecting just how negative the effects on the audience are going to be. Now, for the audience's part, there's something else here. It's up to you to decide to what extent the advice I'm giving is really applicable in your own life. And that's a totally positive process. I think it's totally positive. I'm not going to complain to you. If somebody watched this and says, well, this guy recording the YouTube video, Azel Mazard, he has his own background as a 6'3" tall, conventionally attractive, unconventional intellectual. He's had these women throwing themselves at him his whole life since he was 13 years old. He has his own experience that's warped and skewed, and his advice, it doesn't apply to me, or it's not something I can use or take on board in my life. You know what? I think that's completely legitimate. I think it's totally fine for you to criticize the advice I'm giving, especially in terms of how it lives your life, in terms of what your idea of a meaningful life is. But what I can say, in making this video is that this really fundamentally has a positive message, for you and you and you. This is something that can influence your life positively. It can change your way of thinking about the relationships you've got, about the relationships you ain't got, the ones you're not going to get, the failures. I think your attitude towards failure is a huge part of success in life, right? And where you're going moving forward. Now, you can already get the point. This is not going to be a shallow discussion of a shallow topic. I think it's one of the most meaningful things we have in our lives, and it's one of the most meaningful variables we have in our lives. It's one of the things we can really change, and where our attitudes and our expectations and our efforts change everything, right? There's so many people. Okay, we'll use a real example. I had a grandfather, one of my grandparents. His whole life, he said he wanted to be a lawyer, and he should have been a lawyer, that everything would have worked out better if only he had been a lawyer. Now, I disagree with him. I think probably he would have had a completely miserable life if he'd been, you know what I mean? And his wife, who's very supportive. This is what I'm told. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there. I knew them. I knew my grandparents, but I wasn't in the room for this kind of situation. But apparently, the way she replied to this, and if she did, kudos to her. This is a real alpha move. She replied to this by saying, every time, you should do it. You should do it today. Quit your job, open up a new bank account. We'll move some money. We'll go. You can go back to school. You can start becoming a lawyer today. We can make this work. She said, I'll support you. You can change. And my lawyer, my grandfather would respond to this by being totally self-pitying and saying, no, it's too late. If only he had done this earlier in life. And look, I just want to say there's some truth to that. My grandfather in question here, he was Jewish. He was a Russian immigrant. He was Jewish from Russia, and he was in circumstances including very real institutional anti-Semitism. At that time, there were quotas for how many Jews would be allowed into each university. No joke. There was real overt institutional racism and so on. There were tangible reasons why he couldn't pursue his dream as a lawyer earlier in life. I think he was totally deluded about what his life would have been like after he became a lawyer. But my point here with this digression is this. This is something you can control. This is something you can change. So I'm going to start. The first point is the shallowest in the video. It gets deeper from here, but already this is not that shallow. I think for many people, the discourse that goes on in their own mind takes place standing in front of a mirror. And when they are thinking about why they can't get laid, they're looking in the mirror and they're thinking about, or they're asking themselves why they are not more attractive, or how they could be more attractive, or what they can do to become more attractive. Now, again, this may sound shallow, but I think this leads to profound changes in your life. Okay. What if instead you're asking the question about being interesting? What if instead you recognize that when you're at an event like a conference, when there's 200 people in the room, could be 500 people, could be 5,000 people, many people in the room once. You know what? Yeah, you might look around the room and some people stand out as attractive to you. Some people stand out as ugly. And a whole lot of people there you're just kind of indifferent to. They're neither attractive nor repulsive. You're just indifferent. And as you talk to people in this crowd, if you're at a conference, if you're at some kind of big event like this, there's a lot of face-to-face interaction. The people who will matter to you, the people who you'll want to invite to go out to lunch with you, the people you'll want to get their email and meet up later or something, every single time it's going to be that you found them interesting or they found you interesting. Every single time, no matter how attractive they are, if they're not interesting, nothing happens. Or if you're not interested in them, nothing happens. And then conversely, you meet someone, just give you a quick scenario. Let's say you're having a conversation and you are reflecting, I went to this pharmacy and I got ripped off by the pharmacist. The pharmacist on the desk did this thing where they filled out something fake on the receipt and then I paid for it. I only realized a week later. Is somebody at this conference or somebody in the hotel lobby or somebody at the coffee shop, somebody you no reason to be interested in. They're not attractive and they're not repulsive. They're just kind of neutral when you first behold them. They say to you, oh yeah, you know what? I used to work in a pharmacy and we ripped people off that way all the time. It's terrible, like this. And you start having a conversation with this person about, corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, in the pharmacies in the world, about this particular scam. Okay. Why did this conversation start? And what's going on in that conversation? And you are going to find yourself attracted to this person. Why? You're going to find yourself interested in this person. Why? Because what they're saying is interesting to you. And a lot of the tests that we have going on, right? The test for, is this person attractive enough for me? Are they intelligent enough for me? Are they of the right kind of moral and ethical character for me? Are they the right kind of emotional character for me? Those tests are going on during that conversation. Now, I put the bar real low here for being interesting, right? Like, hey, I'm complaining about being ripped off at a pharmacy. This person says back to me that they used to work, behind the front counter of a pharmacy or the desk. They used to work, they used to check out people's groceries at a pharmacy or something. And there's something already that you talk about. This is just a little bit interesting. There's not a whole hell of a lot of intellectual substance there. But if you really reflect on your own life honestly, I think you're going to find that quality of being interesting and of being interested in the other person and of them being interested in you, it's so much more important than being attractive, right? And I'm going to go on a limb here. Even if I'm wrong, if you in the audience, because my advice is not universally valid, if you in the audience are the exception to the rule, where you personally say, nope, you don't give a damn about that. You don't care how articulate someone is or how intelligent someone is or the way in which that kind of conversation reveals something about their intellectual and emotional character, and you start being interested. That you're like, nope. When you turn up at the conference and there are 500 people and everyone's kind of milling around and chatting each other, that you just scan the crowd and you purely evaluate people on the shape of the body and the proportions of their face, and that is it for you. That's how you see the world. That's how you respond to other humans, and it doesn't change. That when you talk to them, you don't care if they're an idiot, you don't care if they're an alcoholic, you don't care if they're a gambling addict, you don't care how much or how little you have income. If that's how you operate, because I'm not going to make the claim there's nobody on planet Earth who thinks and feels that way. Let me tell you, the other people you're interacting with, okay, it's not like that for them. Like the other people, they are not evaluating you that way. They are not evaluating the way you do when you look in the mirror. Now, in shifting the evaluation from the mirror and the question of attractiveness and being attractive to questions of being interesting and being interested, and that being reciprocal with other people, this has its own kind of aesthetic challenges, right? Now, I'll just say to you, a lot of this advice comes out of my experience with particular friends I've had and their struggles with romance, with getting laid and not getting laid, with trying to have long-term relationships and failing and ending up with short-term relationships or ending up with no relationships at all. But like, just challenge yourself in this way, hypothetically. There's so many guys, and whether they obsess over a woman via Instagram, like they have a whole bunch of Instagram messages back and forth, or it's someone they're at work with, they talk to at work, and they're trying to make the transition to having a real relationship with this person. If you actually recorded your own conversations with this person, if you had a tape recorder and you recorded the conversations you had with them, do you think that you are being interesting? And do you think the other person is interested? I've had friends who send me screenshots of their conversations with women they're trying to have a relationship with on Instagram. It's these messages back and forth. And sometimes, many times, these conversations end with the woman saying that they are just not interested. Like, it can be as blunt as that. Like they say things like, look, I'm not really, it's been nice talking to you, but I'm not really interested. They will say words to that effect. And like, really what you got to ask the guy is, at what stage did you think you were being interesting? And I know it's subjective. And at what stage is she interested? Like, obviously, not the example I already gave. Not everyone is going to be interested to have a conversation about corruption and bribery within the pharmaceutical system. Well, maybe everyone will find that it's a pretty interesting topic of conversation. If you're talking to someone who knows, what's going on. That kind of thing has happened to me so many times too. Even when you meet someone where there were really clear barriers between you, like let's say you meet someone and right away they're pretty serious about Christianity, like they're wearing a cross or some of their other signs that they're Christian. But there's some topic of conversation that gets you going, where you're interested in them and they're interested in what you have to say, and you start to respect and appreciate each other's point of view, and you realize this person has a view of the world coming from their own experience. And yet maybe the first thing you knew about them was negative, like, oh, they're a Christian, they're some kind of pious Christian. Okay, but they're not only a Christian. You know what I mean? There's those other things. You know what? Maybe your first impression of someone is that they're fat. But if you talk to them this way and you start getting to know them and you're interested and they're interested and there's mutual interest there, well, guess what? They're not only fat. You know what I mean? Maybe the first thing you notice is that they have a crooked nose, but they're more than a crooked nose. There's something else there to appreciate. So I just say, I'm not letting anyone off the hook in talking about a shift from attractiveness to being interested and being interesting. If anything, I think the challenge for a lot of people, it's harder to be interesting. It's more demanding than being attractive. Now, this is maybe a case where we can pause and ask, is this exactly the same for men and women? Or is it like 10% different for men and women? Let me tell you something. I've known so many beautiful women who never made any effort to be interesting. They really didn't develop themselves intellectually. And they try to hit on me. They try to get something going with me. And again, so let's say this a woman is 30 years old even. But this is a woman who from age 18 to age 30 just made no effort, just assumed all she needs to do is be good looking and present herself to the guy and say, yup, I'm available for you to hit on me. Just present the opportunity for the guy to be witty and charming and do all the work. And they meet someone like me and I'm saying to them, yeah, what did you have to say to me? Uh-huh. Why are you talking to me again? And so this goes way back. And this is true in my teenage years. And this isn't something that's just happened lately. But, sorry, what do you have to offer? Of what intellectual substance are you? What is there intellectually, emotionally, or otherwise that's common ground that's going to bring us together? Why am I having this conversation with you? And, as you can guess from my attitude is partly, yeah, you know what? There were a lot of beautiful girls in the world. There were a lot of beautiful women at this conference, on this floor, and this, I don't regard that as scarce. I'm, expecting the woman to be able to step up and make an effort. Now, in 2021, what I've just said, is that more or less of a problem for men, or is it exactly the same? I'm open to the possibility it's just as much of a problem with men. Why? A lot of men are video game addicts. A lot of men spend their time playing video games, watching sports on TV, etc. So they may be just as badly off or worse in terms of actually meeting and interacting with the other sex, and in that fundamental basic sense, being interesting. So I gave you guys the warning that was the shallowest point I had to offer. But I don't think it's all that shallow. Like when do you have this discourse in your life? Very few of us. Sorry, Melissa and I talked about this before making the video. This is a rare case because I had 2 hours advance warning before I started recording. By the way, great to see 49 people in the audience. If you can, share the link. If you know anyone who's interested in joining this conversation, share the link with your friends on Facebook or share the link on Twitter, whatever you got. If you share it on Reddit, I don't know who's going to turn up. But let's see who else join the conversation. I'm happy to answer questions from the audience. But anyway, by the way, Melissa also has the right to shout in her opinion. She's sitting just off camera. But yeah, I'll just say, like, one of the things with Melissa is, I can definitely say with Melissa, you never had a friend you would talk to about this issue in this way. This does not have become the autobiography of Melissa on this issue. But people who are frustrated, so we had the black pill being shouted out here, people who are dealing with this, I think a lot of it is staring at the mirror. I think a lot of it is staring into the warped mirror of YouTube. A lot of it is alone one way or the other, like alone with social media, alone with Reddit, right? But it's not, and it's not talking to someone who's maybe older, more sophisticated, more experienced, and who actually sympathizes with your situation, is actually trying to help. That's pretty rare in our culture. Yeah, what
and
also
say? Providing advice to somebody younger, being in the position of being responsible
yes.
for
yes.
helping somebody,
yes.
offering advice. Yeah,
right. And look, I mean, people are profoundly alien on this issue. People are mutually alien. I have known older guys who tried to give me advice that I just completely laughed at. I mean, you can probably imagine. There are older men who, really are misogynists. There are older men who really do regard all women as prostitutes. There are there are men whose advice on this stuff would just be so irrelevant to my life and how I live it that, that can be totally counterproductive too. But I mean, recognizing the locus of where these questions are raised and answered can be significant. And in saying, people ask themselves this in front of the mirror and think about it in terms of attractiveness, and that's already a problem. I'm just saying I think that's already something profound. So I knew 2 women. You can tell a lot about a woman from her relationship with her sister, by the way. So I knew 2. I'm going to make this a little bit anonymous. Oh, what were their ages? So one of them was just over 30 and one was just under 30. So let's say one of them was 32 and one of them was 27, something like this. It's not a big age gap, but both of them were on the biological clock. Am I ever going to have a baby? Am I ever going to get married? And keeping this anonymous, I knew both of these women. And for just a couple of days, I met their mom and I saw them in the room with their mom. And so I saw the relationship with their mother. You really see something. All right. And I remember, so the mother was counseling both of them on settling down and getting married. And both of them were consciously at the stage of wanting to get committed and settle down and move on and have and raise kids. So there was a lot of talk like this going on between them. And there was one time when the younger sister was not in the room. And I was in the room with the mom and the older sister. So I'm going to make up a name. Let's say the younger sister's name was Mary. And you could see, oh my God, you could see how the mother had inculcated lifelong trauma into these 2 girls. The mother stood there and said in this whinging voice, well, I was just thinking, if only Mary could lose a little weight, maybe some man would be interested. And it was the way she was saying it. It's not that she said it at all. The way she was saying it, you realize they've grown up hearing this since they were maybe 15 years old, and they're hearing it now. And the younger sister was thin enough to be a wedding gown model. She was thin enough to be, I can't think of a good example, saying wedding gown because they're kind of big, billowy gowns. They often want someone with a very narrow waist. The sister, in terms of body fat, was she was very slender already. There was absolutely no reasonable man on earth would not be interested in her for wanting her to lose weight. But the depths of the kind of misconception and the way in which the mother's misconception is being imposed on the daughters, and they're being asked to live up to that. And by the way, the mom was anorexic thin. And I'm just being real with you. When I first met the mom, I just assumed she'd had cancer or something. You know what I mean? When you meet someone who's older and they're real skinny, you're like, I just assumed some, if not cancer, she'd had some serious health problem. But right away, you're like, oh, it's not a health problem. You know what I mean? Okay, so the younger sister, she's very beautiful. I mean, again, apart, she's not just not overweight, she's very beautiful. If you sat down and talked to her for 5 minutes, you would realize right away she was someone who either had PTSD, bipolar disorder, something. There's something really wrong with her. Like, she starts off staring you in the eyes like a cult leader, and then she drifts away where she's staring into space and she's like crushing something in her hand repeatedly. Like, there's something really, like, I don't care how good looking you are. If I was with this chick, I would not feel safe sleeping in the same room. I'd want a padlock on the door. She was terrifying. Now, look, I didn't ask any questions. Like, a lot of you guys don't know me off camera. I do not ask nosy questions. I just don't. I can know people for years and not know things about them. Seriously. I can know somebody for years. After they've known me for 5 years, they mentioned that they're a stripper, and I didn't know that. Like, seriously, there's people I've known for years. There's privates. Why would I ask? I don't have. What do you do on the weekends? Oh, they were a professional stripper. I didn't know that. There's all kinds of things where I don't know people's secrets. They don't ask. They want to tell me. They want to tell me. But I found out after the younger sister left. The older sister said, yeah, she's really going through a problem right now with psychiatric medication. She was on some kind of antidepressant or antipsychotic or what have you. Okay. So I'm just saying, like, if you're the mother in that situation, or if you're the man who's potentially going to not just seduce this woman, but like have children with her and have a family with her, you don't think there were a lot of deeper, more important issues here than whether or not she could lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds? Like, are you kidding me? So, sorry. This is a digression talking about the locus in which we consider these things. For most people, it's the mirror. For a significant number of people, it's the internet, whether that's Reddit or Facebook or YouTube or something. And yeah, for some people, it's their relationship with their own parents. For some people, their own mom and dad are the only people they talk to about who they're dating. Or, again, that's kind of alien to both Melissa and I. Neither one of us, we didn't relate to our parents that way. We didn't talk about our options in our love life that way. I could digress now, as there's a whole other topic. But like the locus within which you consider these questions, and then what it is you're blaming for them, like what it is you're problematizing, and how easily people just think in terms of appearance, where they just think about their own appearance and whether or not other people are attracted to that, and they don't let them think through the extent to which they themselves don't operate that way. Well, you think, wait, I don't just pursue the most attractive person I can find. Like in real life situations, you meet a bunch of people, and all the times you meet someone, and at first there's nothing attractive. But what would you find attractive with them? And then you find out what you have in common, or they say something that makes you think they're an intelligent and interesting person. And it goes from there. Something develops from there. So that's not deep. It's shallow, but really being honest with yourself about that, I think, has tremendously important implications throughout the rest of your life. So I'm going to pause at this point and take a look at what you guys are asking me in the comment section. I realize you guys are talking amongst yourselves, which is great. Not everything has to be a question posed to me. You can talk to one another. So Ryan Michael says the consequences of this topic are profound. Case in point, the incel who killed 5 people in the United Kingdom the other day. So that is yet another incel killing that I have not heard about. I would just say, though, my advice here is not limited to incels. The question of why you can't get laid could be asked, for example, by a divorced person. Like, they've been married in the past, they're not now. It could be asked by someone who's had a series of successful short-term relationships or love affairs. There are all kinds of people who are going to ask this and reflect on this. It's not limited to the incel phenomenon. Incel phenomenon, it's a huge cultural issue. If you think it's bad in Western atheist culture, Take a look at Muslim incels. Take a look at Hindu incels. Caste Hinduism. What's it like to be a Brahmin incel? Are you kidding me? There are more sexually repressive cultures around the world where people struggle with this. And within the more orthodox Christian subcultures of our own society, like people who still take Christianity seriously, it's a huge problem. So yeah, but the question of why can't you get laid, this goes way beyond the incel category. Okay, so here's an interesting comment from William McGeehan. He says, quote, "Let's be frank, unless you look like the Elephant Man, getting laid isn't a real problem." I totally disagree, William. I mean, maybe we'll get into that. Maybe we'll get into that topic later on. I'd be interested to know what cultural background that guy has and what his assumptions are. So I said earlier, super briefly, that part of the problem with presenting this information in any format, part of the problem with presenting this information on YouTube, in a book, in an essay, in a poem, is the extent to which your circumstances as the person giving the advice may just be incompatible with the circumstances of the person in the audience receiving the advice. But I mean, one of the real differences in circumstances, should be singular. One of the differences between you in your circumstance would be what it is you're willing to tolerate, accept, or fall in love with, in a partner. For someone like me, if I were to meet women in a bar or nightclub, I wouldn't be interested in a single one of them. The type of women I want to meet are not at a bar or a nightclub, So, I mean, it's something as simple as that. Now, there are some men who would go to a bar or nightclub. Let's give an example. In England, this is a very big deal, and people do meet this way. You can go to a pub. A pub just means a type of bar, alcohol service. You can go to a pub on a night when they are playing sports on TV. And you will meet other people who are watching that same sport. Rugby was the real sport for this. Rugby was the getting laid sport. You can go wearing your rugby shirt, and you can meet a young woman who is also drinking beer and watching rugby and looking to sleep with a guy who plays rugby and who has a certain level of physical fitness too, as part of the stereotype. But I mean, rugby night at bars, you could absolutely see that going on. A lot of guys with big forearms. It's a real forearm sport. They would wear shirts. They really cross their arms and show off their forearms. Often the rest of them isn't that great, but you get really big forearms with that sport. Okay, so someone who's in that subculture, who's in that lane, who has those attitudes and those values, I could understand them saying what William says here, that let's be frank, unless you look like the Elephant Man, getting laid is no problem. But let me say, for me, the whole problem stems out of the fact that I want to be with somebody who respects me, and I want to be with somebody I have respect for. Now, look, if you're a rugby fan and you respect everyone else who's a rugby fan, if that's all it takes for you, I'm not saying you're subhuman or something, but you're playing by a different set of rules, right? If you're someone who drinks alcohol and hangs out in bars watching rugby, and you'd have plenty of respect reciprocally for someone else for whom all those things are true too, that's a big difference, and then your perspective is going to be profoundly different. All right. Okay, so Vegan Soldier says, Vegan Soldier, I don't remember seeing you here in the crowd before, I'm just mentioning. Vegan Soldier says, quote, "The black pill is real. It's mostly based on facial attractiveness and height, especially for young men on Tinder," close quote. So I would just say this phenomenon, the black pill basically means people who've completely given up on love, romance, etc. If you watch them on YouTube, you will be able to tell in 30 seconds what the problem is with any one of these guys. It's not mysterious right away. It's not just what they look like. It's how they talk. It's what their philosophy is towards life, their attitudes, right? Men who are black-pilled, they come on YouTube and they exhibit for you in a self-explanatory way exactly what the problem is and why they can't get laid. So, I think that's something that'd be very hard to get across in writing. It'd be something that'd be hard for me to get across as my YouTube channel criticizing another YouTube channel. But when YouTube channels speak for themselves in the first person, you can tell absolutely. Okay, we've got a lot of hard-hitting comments here from Ron Sims. Ron Sims, I think you've been in my audience for at least 5 years. A long time viewer of the channel. Ron Sims says, quote, "What people don't realize is that attractiveness is used as a leverage or a cover of an otherwise empty, unexamined, vapid life." Close quote. I completely disagree with you, Ron. I completely disagree. So I've got to say, I feel that attractiveness, um, what your body and face look like, is just in no way related, cause and effect, to whether or not you're leading a meaningful life. That is really my position on that. There are some beautiful people who lead a meaningful life, and there are some beautiful people who have a meaningless life. There's no shortage of ugly people leading a meaningless life. I'm sorry, but you know, I feel like this view of the world. And Ron, by the way, I know you may just be joking around. He may not mean this. It's a comment in the comment section, and it's no big deal. But I've grown up all my life with stereotypes about Jews and Judaism. I'm ethnically Jewish, and people would say to me that they thought all Jewish people were highly intelligent intellectuals or geniuses, like as if everyone who's born Jewish is of this kind of higher intellectual level. And they'd often be saying this to me, and they don't think they're racist. They don't think they're anti-Semitic. And it's like, have you ever tried going to a nightclub in Tel Aviv? Do you really think there are no stupid people leading a meaningless life in Tel Aviv? Hey, have you ever tried going to watch a rugby game at a sports bar in Tel Aviv? These kinds of stereotypes. It's understandable why there are stereotypes about beautiful people. And this is particularly, sorry, this is not a big digression, but this is particularly the type of beautiful people who are interviewed on television, the type of beautiful people who become famous as actors or models. The stereotype exists for reasons, but I have to say, I just think it's completely false. There's no cause and effect relationship. And let me just put it this way. When you go to the library, the door opens just as easily for the beautiful and the ugly alike. When you take the book off the shelf, it's just as much work for an ugly person to read it or a beautiful person to read it. It's not easier. Whatever it is you're doing to cultivate your mind, or to exercise your ambition in life, or even just your curiosity in life, it is no easier for an ugly person than for a beautiful person, and vice versa. So I think you got to really keep that in perspective, despite those stereotypes that indeed the mass media tend to amplify, shall we say. We'll get a great comment. You two look great together on the thumbnail. Thanks. Oh, you can check out my Instagram for more pictures of us. More pictures of the happy couple. I guess it's really Melissa's Instagram. No, you got that great picture of us picking berries.
I do.
Right. Well, I could share. Okay, I won't. Some of you will figure out the Instagram I'm talking about. Some of you won't. We'll leave that mysterious. But thanks for the compliment. So a quote from James McPine says, quote, "I guess the difference would be in those countries, Muslim countries, etc., it wouldn't be as shameful to be a male virgin at 25 as it would be in the West." Everything. I mean, the way religion shapes everything. What is not changed by religion? And I mean, I can ask. Sorry, James. I'm not saying this to insult you. James, have you ever dated a Muslim woman? Have you ever dated a Hindu woman? Have you ever even dated, say, an Hispanic Catholic woman who takes Catholicism really seriously? I mean, everything's different. Everything's different in ways that people are not even aware of. It shapes their sexuality. It shapes the questions that are asked and the questions that go unasked. So no, it's profoundly, utterly different. Everything going on. Okay, so another great question from Alioth. Alioth asks, why do you have your comments disabled in all your videos? Alioth, if you click on the description for any of my videos, just one of them, you will find that every single time in the description to the video, you'll find the answer to this question. So I do wonder. I mean, you've watched at least one of my videos. We don't know. Maybe you've watched 100 of them, but I do have the link that answers that question in the description of the video. I'm happy to have you guys here. I'm happy to take the time to answer these questions and chit chat with you. But I am a full-time university student studying Chinese. I have to make tough decisions about how much of my time I let the internet occupy. And the internet's demands on my time are basically infinite. The amount of time I have to give is finite. So you got to think about it that way. All right. Okay, all right. So I'm going to get back to the topic here. But Turnbull, I've seen the video you're talking about. So Turnbull says, if you're interested in the topic of this video, I'd recommend the TED Talk, quote, How I Hacked Online Dating by 80 Web. That's a terrible video. It's a distant memory, that video, but I remember that. I absolutely despise that video. Maybe by the end of this conversation, you'll see why I despise it so much. All right. So, okay. So just wonder. So Alioth, you haven't had 5 minutes. You haven't clicked on that link. You haven't taken my answer seriously. It's like, what do you think? I've been uploading thousands of videos for 7 years. Do you think I don't know what I'm talking about? You think I don't know how much time it takes to run a YouTube comment section? Yeah. I don't know. How about you? Do you have a YouTube channel? Do you have a YouTube comment section? Do you know how much time that takes up in your life? Sorry, I just don't understand why you can't fundamentally be sympathetic and take seriously when I've taken the time to give you an answer to your question. It's a serious question. You got a serious answer. The answer was already in the description to every single one of my videos. So, respect it or check it, as 50 Cent used to say. All right. I noticed that pretty much nobody is asking why does this question matter? This is a rare example of a question where everyone, I think, has a sense of the gravity of it in our lives. I saw a YouTube channel recently for the first time. It is a new YouTube channel anyway, so I could have only discovered it a few weeks ago or something when the guys started. Those of you who support me on Patreon will know the YouTube channel I'm talking about because I shared the link. He's a guy of First Nations ancestry, so American Indian or Indigenous Canadian, however you want to put it. And he was talking in his YouTube channel about how his whole life had changed for the better after he became vegan. So he grew up in this Indigenous culture that valorized hunting, that viewed the killing of animals partly as spiritual and partly as manly, and he grew up with all these things. And as he said, simply but bluntly, everyone in his family had reacted to his decision to become vegan. This is a big deal that had a big impact on his parents, grandparents, brothers, and sisters, that this was something everyone was taking very seriously. They had never even considered not eating animals. And it was so most white Western people think of eating meat just as neutral or indifferent, but he was really growing up in a subculture where eating meat and killing animals and eating them together was reviewed as morally positive. This is, now again, I'm going to fill in the blanks a little bit here. He didn't talk about it at such length, but you can imagine there's this positive sense of you're carrying on the traditions of your ancestors, or this has some special cultural and indeed, as I say, spiritual significance, hunting and eating meat. So in that context, he decided to become vegan. And then he lists off for you all the ways in which veganism has made his life better. He very briefly states that the reason he became vegan and the reason he first kind of heard about and thought about veganism seriously was that he got a new girlfriend who he's in love with very much. It's not clear to me if they're engaged to be married or something, but it's a high commitment relationship. And he provides the link to her channel. So he has a serious relationship with this woman. This woman already is vegan. This woman already is actually a life coach and is some kind of spiritual leader in her own way, after her own fashion. Now, when you hear that, I think it's just a great example of how, the romantic relationships in our lives totally shape who we are and who we become. The questions that go unasked in your life, as opposed to questions that get asked every single day, you know what I mean? The way in which having just one person come to your life and love you and listen to you and you listen to them, the way in which that shapes and reshapes everything, it's difficult to exaggerate. And I mean, I know most people think about really shallow stuff like, actually, I remember this. I remember a woman on my channel, and she said that when she was single, her bathroom would be unbelievably messy. She just didn't think about where anything was or how disgusting this. I haven't known people about this problem, but she said the whole bathroom was full of just, unbelievable mess and what have you. And she said as soon as she had a boyfriend or a serious boyfriend in her life, there would be this huge change in just like literally making room for him on the counter of the bathroom and of trying to reorganize her life that way. Well, so that's something the question didn't even arise before. It didn't even arise in her mind to think, well, is there something wrong with my bathroom? Is it a problem? Is it messy? She didn't perceive it as messy. You bring someone else into your life and suddenly you perceive it as messy. This guy, again, you can know who he is. It's not that fascinating a case study. I think it's typical. He was an electrician. He drove a truck, or I'm sorry, if it was an electrical engineer or something, I'm sorry, getting slow on. But he did some kind of trade like this with his hands. He drove a truck. He ate meat. He engaged in hunting. He got a new girlfriend. All kinds of things he would have never questioned. He started questioning, and soon enough, he started coming up with new answers. And the other thing is, I think about this a lot in terms of politics and not just your personal life. The other thing that changes are your priorities. Things that you maybe one day would have gotten to. Oh, yeah. Well, again, I can keep it shallow with reorganizing your bathroom, cleaning your bathroom. Oh, yeah. Maybe one day I should clean up the bathroom, or maybe one day I should think about trying a vegan diet. Maybe it's something you have thought about, but it's a very low priority. Now that you're in a relationship, this becomes a top priority. And other things that used to be your top priority become a lower priority or, disappear altogether. So, I think a lot of people really underestimate how profound that is. And on the other hand, people who know exactly how profound that is, maybe they're the ones who are the most kind of desperately frustrated with their own inability to get laid, or if they are getting laid, their inability to form really meaningful long-term relationships. Being in a relationship, even if we just limit it to that narrow focus, all right, you might think it doesn't change who you are. But even if we just admit these 2 points, it changes the questions you're being asked. It changes the questions you ask yourself. And then it changes your priorities in life in terms of dealing with problems and what it is you're doing. With time, with the passage of a few months or a few years, it changes everything. It changes who you are. Now, I'd also like to say, I wish we lived in a world where there were a whole lot of relationships that could be that close and that meaningful and change things that way. I have never once heard a PhD student, I have never once heard a PhD student say to me that their relationship with a professor, with their supervisor, changed their life this way. Never. I've never heard anyone say, we're not talking about sex. I'm just talking about like their friendship with, or their intellectual camaraderie with a professor. I have never heard anyone say that their relationship with a professor changed their life that way. So, and then on the other hand, when there are exceptions to the rule, they tend to get sexualized. I'll remember this forever, even though it was such a brief thing. I remember a woman called in to complain to a radio show. So I believe this was CBC Radio here in Canada. She called in to complain that they were talking about husbands cheating on their wives, basically. And she said, look, I think what you don't realize is that when it's just an emotional and an intellectual infidelity, that can be just as damaging. And she had this example from her own life. But what she was describing was a pair of work colleagues who really kind of loved each other. There was no sex, there was no kissing, but they had a really meaningful life together as work colleagues, and that this created jealousy in the man's wife, even though it was a non-sexual relationship. But this kind of thing. So as I say, it's incredibly rare. And then when there is some exception to this way, people tend to sexualize it. Like they can't let go of the idea, oh, well, you and your work colleague, you're more than just colleagues. You're more than just friends. Or indeed, you can imagine that the student and professor, that somehow this is more than just colleagues and this is more than just friends. So yeah, obviously, I'm not going to slam the door on that and say that human nature is only susceptible to these kinds of profoundly important relationships when they are sexual or become sexualized. But yeah, it's terrifying to me at age 42 to look around the world and see how rare that is. So look, I've almost finished. I'm in the last few pages of the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin put a lot of time and effort into socializing with other men. Nothing in his autobiography indicates that he had an intellectual relationship with his wife. So I'm not hating on her, but we learn how he met her and how he ended up marrying her. And he was trying to marry another woman and it didn't work out. And he ends up, he had kids with this woman. She was involved with his life to some extent, but he put a lot of time into these gentlemen's clubs he created as kind of round table discussions where they'd read a book and discuss the book, and they discuss, the kind of social change they wanted to make, a lot of civic virtue stuff. Just to give you an example, he set up a street sweeping service for the neighborhood. He was always doing fundraisers for things like this. Okay, let's all donate money and hire someone to clean the streets, this kind of thing. A lot of civic virtues. But there isn't a single relationship mentioned or discussed in the book, like a relationship with another man. That's important to him this way. Like I'm just giving you my honest opinion based on reading his autobiography. As gregarious as he was, as much time as he was spending socializing, I feel like this guy really spent his life alone. Like I feel like he just had very shallow, cooperative relationships with other men. He was a newspaper editor, and there were guys writing articles, giving them to him. He had business relationships with other men, and so on. But I don't think he had anything like this in his life that really challenged him and led him to grow in that kind of way. So just mentioning that's an example that leads me to reflect that way. Anyway, reading the autobiographies of men, you're left to wonder: were there more important relationships that are just omitted entirely? Or, is this just their way of writing about their life as opposed to how it really was? One of the autobiographies I read many, many years ago was that of Charlie Chaplin. And, likewise, the shallowness of his relationships with everyone other than the woman he's having sex with at that time is terrifying. Charlie Chaplin had a huge number of kids, by the way, with a bunch of different. Yeah, he had a sex life that inspired scandal and rumor in the press. And he ended up marrying a woman. His last wife, who stayed with him, was dramatically younger than him, and this also, excited a lot of gossiping and what have you. Anyway, okay, so guys, coming back to the title of this video, and I just mentioned I'm paying attention to the comments as they pop up, so you guys are welcome to participate. You're also welcome to hit the thumbs up button. You can change your mind later and hit thumbs down, or you can undo the thumbs up so that it's neither thumbs up nor thumbs down. But if you hit thumbs up now, it'll help more people discover the video and join in the topic. So a lot of the advice I'm going to give here and I'm going to mention here, it does relate to particular people I've known and particular people I've given advice to in my life. And, it took some time to reflect on this today, and I do think it's of real significance and importance for others. And very unusually, I have a few things written down on paper. I almost never make any notes before doing a live stream recording a video. We have just a few notes on paper. Okay, number one, I think it's really important that you don't tell people what you're looking for, and that you don't tell yourself what it is you're looking for. So you don't, to use more technical parlance, that you don't reify in your own mind what it is you want or who it is you want. This is quite a difficult discipline for some people, of actually being open-minded, of actually being willing to meet people one at a time on a one-by-one basis. And I think on a deep level, what it requires is the admission that you yourself don't really know what it is you want. Or even to put it more scrupulously, that you don't know what would be good enough for you. Like, you may have a sense of what the standards are you're imposing and what it is you want people to live up to. So again, I feel all this stuff, it really applies to men and women, equally. Whether you imagine a man or a woman doing this, a lot of us go through our lives with a definite set of criteria, with a checklist of what it is they want a partner to have. And people at the office, people at the workplace, people at the university with the other university students, people talk about this stuff openly and loudly all the time. They say, oh, well, I want to be with someone who is X, Y, and Z, and he or she has to have this requirement and this requirement. They have to do this and that. They have a whole list of things set up in their mind, and they will talk about it openly. They'll talk about it. They'll say it to someone who's trying to flirt with them or start a relationship with them right there. Now, the reality is, so I'll take an easy example. Okay, let's do some easy examples. Let's do some difficult examples. All right, let's say you meet a young man. I spend a lot of time on university campuses still now, but have been for many years. I've been on and off a student at university. I've been on and off an instructor at a university too. But let's say you meet a young man, and while he's a student in university, he's saying all the time that he's only interested in Japanese women. What he really wants is a Japanese girlfriend or a Japanese wife. So, okay, let's fill in. He's a white guy in a university in the West. He's a white guy, and he says this is what he likes. This is what he sees on the internet. This is what he's into. He's only looking for a Japanese girlfriend or a Japanese wife. Now, that is going to have consequences in his life now. I'll go say further. Even if he doesn't say it out loud to anyone, if he actually kept that to himself, he doesn't let anyone know, if he just thinks that, if that's just part of his internal monologue, that's going to impact his life here and now. It's going to close all kinds of doors. And people are going to pick up on it. Like, when you're talking to other people face to face, even if you don't enunciate, if you don't let it out, you have set this limitation for yourself. You've created this category for yourself. So this guy goes through university. Let's say he went to university in Chicago, right? And he's preparing for this life he's fantasized about in Japan. This is probably a life mostly made up of ideas he's got from the internet or maybe from movies or comic books or something. He's got this idea built up his life. He gets none of the kind of really requisite experience with making a relationship work as a result, because he's got this fantasy built up in his mind of what it is he's looking for and what it is he's going to find in Japan. Naturally, everybody is turned off by him while he's at university, including the small number of Japanese women he manages to meet while he's at university, which is a tiny minority of the people around him. And then he goes to Japan. And guess what? Once he arrives in Japan, who he has a whole lot in common with? He has a whole lot in common with the white women who are living in Japan. He has more in common with a white American woman who's chosen to move to Japan and to start learning Japanese and to start trying to have a more meaningful life over there. Someone who's made a similar decision for similar reasons. There's a lot of common ground there, and there's the basis for a really great relationship, right? And if you're telling yourself that all you want is to be with a Japanese person, that that's your guiding, right? Obviously, you're not even going to consider that. You're not going to be open to that, right? Now, the other horrifying thing he's going to realize, this may be obvious in other examples, is that once he actually goes to Japan, once he starts talking to Japanese people every day, he's going to realize what we all know. If you're over the age of 30, you already know this. You don't like Japanese people. You don't like Japanese women. You like one Japanese woman out of 10,000. And guess what? If you were really being honest with yourself, if you really had this kind of experience in life, which not everyone has, if you were meeting and talking to a lot of Scottish women, you know what? The truth is, you don't like Scottish women. You're really interested in, you could really have a relationship with one Scottish woman out of 10,000. You know what? German women, French women, like we could go down through the list here. The reality is that once you really know who you are and who these people are, that actually it's going to be really rare that you meet someone you're compatible with, intellectually, emotionally, or otherwise, and you could have a great future with them. And what really matters is not whether or not they're Japanese. Now, likewise, if someone is going around with a list in their mind, let's just say it's a woman who's going to a conference. I'm mentioning conferences because that's where you can meet people are going to be like-minded, in advance. So let's take it all the way back here. Does anyone remember the old atheist conferences? They used to have one called Skepticon, the skeptic conference. So there were these conferences for people who were atheists, who were pro-science or anti-religion, and people would go there to get laid. Surprise, surprise. So, naturally, some woman might go to one of these conferences, and let's say she has in her mind, she wants a man who is over 6 feet tall, someone who is atheist and anti-religious. And let's say she also wants a guy who has an advanced degree in the sciences. Like she just made that up in her mind. She's like, really, I want a guy who's got at least like a master's degree in physics or chemistry, something like that. Maybe she's thinking, mechanical engineering, maybe. But she'd really like someone with an advanced degree in physics or chemistry. That's, in terms of who she is, that's what she's looking for. Well, once she goes to that conference, just like the young man who went to Japan, you know what she's going to discover? It's not every guy who's over 6 feet tall. It's not every guy who's got a degree in chemistry, advanced degree in chemistry or physics, right? When you meet these people and you start dealing with them in real life, you're going to realize, even just at that conference, whoa, the vast majority of these guys who meet my checklist of requirements, the vast majority of them, I'm not attracted to them. Or even if I am attracted to them, I could never have a relationship that works with these guys. And then on the contrary, you've got to let yourself really be open-minded. Maybe you meet a guy who is 5'6", like he's shorter than 6 feet tall, and he has a university degree in English literature. He doesn't have a degree in the science. Let's say he has a PhD in the poetry of Shakespeare. But when you meet him, you start to realize, hey, what's really scarce here, what's really rare that I have to value and I have to act on is the common ground I do have with this guy, not the common ground I don't have with him, not the things that he's lacking, but it's the things that he's got. And that's what I've got to work with. And that, hey, this is one guy in 10,000, I could be attracted to, and I'm interested in him and he's interested in me. There's something really precious there that you shouldn't reject him or shut him down for that reason. But I would say the power of this, the reason I say, don't tell other people what you want. Don't tell other people what you're looking for. And don't tell yourself what you're looking for, is that what I see is both women and men, they tell themselves this again and again and again. And then they can't even perceive it when they meet that person they've really got, a common basis for a relationship to work with. They meet that person, again, whatever, he's 5'6" and he's an English literature major, whatever the reasons are. Or again, it's the young man, he thinks he's only looking for a Japanese woman, but he meets a white woman who's studying Japanese, and really you have more in common and so on, or whatever. That man, maybe he goes around saying he wants to be with a woman who's 5 years younger than him, and he meets a woman who's 5 years older than him instead. But are you letting yourself even see that? Are you letting yourself even talk to that person in a way where you're going to discover how much common ground you've got, how much potential you've got to really have a meaningful relationship? So in terms of people I have known face to face, I've known people who are so hung up on tattoos. There are people who only want a relationship with someone else who has tattoos. And there are people who can never be attracted to someone who say they will never be in a relationship with someone who does have tattoos. Like there are people who 100% reject anyone with tattoos and said can't even find them attractive, can't even look at them, or want to see them naked or something. And there's the opposite with the one. I'm using this is an extreme example, but I've really known people like this. And there are people who have internalized some kind of social hierarchy, whether that's bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, or whatever. There are people who are like, oh, well, he's not even a university graduate. So there are guys like that. Maybe he's an electrician. Maybe he finished high school. He got the practical trade like plumbing or electricity or something. Maybe he's a really great guy. Maybe you can have a really great life together in various ways. But you have to let yourself see that. And so much of what we do in relationships, you're sabotaging yourself because you're telling yourself this and you're telling others this. You're letting everyone at your university know, everyone at your workplace know, everyone in your family know. Oh, no, I'm only interested in this kind of guy who meets these parameters. And the reality is, you could meet someone who meets none of those criteria, who doesn't check any of those boxes on the checklist, where it really works. It really is. You really are attracted. You can really have a great sex life with them, and maybe a great love life, a great intellectual life, a great emotional life too. And once you meet enough of the people who have all those check marks, you will realize that even within that category, it is like one person out of 10,000. So you might as well just stop sabotaging yourself with the categorical thinking. Now, I don't know how many of you people are vegan in this audience. I'm trying to tell by my sense of smell what percent of the audience is vegan right now, right? Whoo, but man, it's so easy to tell yourself, I want to be with someone who's vegan, right? And for a lot of people, like not just the first 6 months that they're vegan, right? But like maybe like the first 10 years that you're vegan, you haven't met that many vegan people in real life. Just like, I'm sorry, I know that example might seem shallow, but the young man who's in university and says he only wants to be with a Japanese woman, but he doesn't really know many Japanese people. He hasn't really lived in Japanese culture. He hasn't known hundreds or thousands of Japanese women. Maybe he did. Maybe he knew one Japanese girl in high school and he really had eyes for her or something, but he doesn't really have any deep knowledge of the culture of people or just even what they look like or something. Well, up to a certain point as a vegan, and it can be 10 years, you've only met and spoken to like 5 other vegans. And just like that young man has a fantasy about Japan based on what he saw on the internet, YouTube, Reddit, wherever he gets this fantasy, or pornography or whatever, like you have your own fantasy about what vegans are supposed to be, who you want them to be for you, what it is, how you're going to have all these other things in common. And then if you actually get to know hundreds or thousands of other vegans, I am in a position to say over 7 years, I got to know thousands of other vegans. You were going to realize, whoa, it's like one person in 10,000. I've really got some kind of common basis with. So even with something like that, even with something as important as that, you might as well flip it around and say, I don't know what I want. I'm going to profoundly admit to myself, I don't know who I'm trying to meet. I don't know what I want. I'm going to meet people on a one-by-one basis. And if I meet someone, it's a really great guy, it's a really great woman, whatever you're pursuing. If I meet someone that this can really work with, you can meet them and then say to them, look, I need you to live up to this standard. I need you to be vegan for you to be with me. That either it's going to work or not. And sometimes, people try and they break up and they get back together 2 years later or 5 years later, whatever it is. Like, look, you and I have something really special, something we can build on, but there are things you have to do to be on my level or to make this work. There demands that. That is what most people are going to end up doing, because you realize that even something as crucially important as vegan versus non-vegan, that you can't really make this work as a category, as a chick market, so on and so forth. So we got sympathy coming in from the audience. Atlanta Richard says that he's in a doomed romance. There's a woman, a particular woman, or maybe several women, that he feels he can't pursue because they're not vegan. Man up. What can I tell you? I mean, I know it may seem hard or impossible. A lot of interesting question here. I know it may seem hard or impossible to meet someone and start to fall in love with them, or have them start to fall in love with you. I mean, however far it goes, and then say, look, for this to go further, I need you to be vegan. What about quitting alcohol? What about quitting gambling? What about quitting going to the nightclub? What about quitting smoking? Actually, the vegan thing, it's not that hard. On the spectrum of these things, it's not that hard. What about quitting Islam? What about quitting Mormonism? Like, people in relationships ask each other to make huge commitments and huge changes in their lives, and they do. And I mean, this is the other funny thing about relationships. So I was trying to hint at earlier how crucial these relationships are. And that I wish you could have relationships like this with your professor or somebody else, but it seems to almost always, 99% of the time, it's someone you're in love with or something, right? Why is it that people are willing to get motivated and prioritize doing what they need to do in order to be a better person for someone else and not for themselves? That's the biggest riddle of all, right? People will so easily get motivated, like, oh, I got to lose weight. I got to get in shape. I got to get healthy for my girlfriend, for my boyfriend. I've got to do this for someone else, but you wouldn't do it for yourself, like, 6 months earlier or 2 months earlier or something, right? Oh, I got to quit gambling, quit smoking, quit drinking. I got to do this for, this woman I'm in love with. Oh, but what about you? You don't count for nothing? You wouldn't do it just for yourself? You wouldn't quit gambling just so you could be a better person? Oh, no. You're willing to do this to be a better person for someone else. And by the way, you see this all the time with the religious mentality. There are all kinds of things. People wouldn't do something for themselves, but they'll do it for God. They'll do it for Jesus. They'll do it for a statue. There's a fucking statue they put on an alcove, and they pray to it and talk to it every morning. And they say to the statue, I'm doing this for you. Like, they say to the statue, okay, I'm going to give up eating meat, whatever it is. I'm going to give up gambling. They'll be celibate. They're doing it for this fucking statue. They won't do it for themselves, but the statue they're motivated for, right? Whether it's for God or from some girl they're in love with or something. That's a really sick, sad part of human nature. That, what we won't do for ourselves, we will do for others. So anyway, by the way, it's an interesting thing from Natasha. Natasha says, quote, I appreciate that Eisel doesn't refer to grown women as girls. The funny thing is, in real life, like off camera, I correct myself with that all the time. Because in our culture, you do hear it all the time. Like, I say, oh, I remember I was talking to this girl, and I'll be like, no. She was about 21. Young woman. Like, I do actually out loud correct myself that way. So no, I do think it's a significant thing that we make the effort to not say girl, unless you're genuinely talking about someone young enough that they are a girl. And you know what's funny? I used to fight about this as an editor all the time. So I was a newspaper editor. I was also an editor of nonfiction in books. And I would all the time kind of put the hammer down and say, no, we're not going to refer to young women in their 20s as girls. And sometimes it would get dicey, because they'd be like, well, okay, this is 18 or something. Is 18 a girl, or is it an adult, or is it? But no. But I mean, well, yeah, but some people would say boy. Melissa's, mentioning the gender, whether it's boy versus man or something, right? And obviously in that case, you can just say teenager. You can avoid the problem. But when you're actually editing, when you're actually rewriting someone else's text, then people will fight you. People want to use, especially girls, but they do also use boy. Boy is used. There's the same kind of cultural issues with boy. In some ways, worse when there's racism involved or something. Why are you calling someone a boy when you could be calling them a man? But yeah. So we have a really shallow comment from Posthuman. Quote, maybe the answer to this riddle is selfish gene propagation, which unconsciously leads to such commitments. I'm sorry, Posthuman. I'm sorry, but you're dead wrong. I'm sorry, but there's no way evolutionary psychology and genetics can explain this one. Sorry. Hard no on that. I know you're writing with no bad intentions. By the way. Okay, so moving on to the next on my numbered list of notes. All right, so this one's hard hitting for me, and I remember one male friend of mine in particular. I talked about this a lot with, and I think a lot of you at first you're not going to get what I'm talking about. You're going to feel alienated from this, and then if you just think about it and reflect for a few minutes, you'll see how it really matters in your own life. A lot of us suffer from what I call the Seinfeld syndrome. I'll explain it in a minute. And this ultimately does come down to a problem of being selfish, self-centered, engaging in short-term thinking. But to some extent, it's also dehumanizing the other people who are in your life, potentially or actually the other people you have sex with, or that you're trying to have sex with and haven't had sex with yet, potential partners or actual partners. Now, I call this the Seinfeld syndrome. Many years ago, I used to talk about TV shows like Beverly Hills 90210, pardon me, as an example of this, but I think nobody remembers the TV show Beverly Hills 90210. Seinfeld was a comedy show where pretty much every week there would be a new girlfriend who emerged in this man's life. They would romance each other, fall in love to some extent, and then next week there's a new woman that he's dating. And nothing in his own life would change. He didn't do anything for these women. The furniture in his apartment didn't change, He wasn't making their lives better in any way, right? He also wasn't learning anything from them or changing. As with many American TV shows, there's this sort of artificial sense in which each of the characters is static, where each episode, it's as if the whole world resets and begins again. And there's no particular progression in the plot or the no character development or what have you. But many men I have known, maybe one woman I've known, they live their lives in such a way that they feel there's this one Lego brick in the wall. There's this one space in their lives for someone to come into their apartment and have sex with them and then leave. And that's it. They live like Seinfeld, where they are going to continue living their own lives in their own terms. They are going to continue pursuing their own story in which they are the main character. And the people they have sex with come into their lives as a kind of accessory, as a kind of incidental and evanescent addition that adds some color to their lives and then disappears. Now, I draw your attention back to the title of this video. And again, this is not about incels. We're here talking about people who can get laid, but nevertheless are complaining about why they can't get laid. They're either not getting laid as much as they want to, or they're not having the kind of relationships they're hoping to have. I remember talking face to face with a male friend of mine about this. And I wasn't exactly using Socratic dialogue, but I was asking questions in a very barbed way to get him to get him to really reconsider. And I remember saying to him, so your assumption is she won't come over to your apartment? And he was just kind of confused. And I was like, so what? Your assumption is you'll go to a hotel room? Your assumption is you'll go to her apartment? And he was kind of like answering, but you could see he was kind of mystified as well. Right. And the next time you go to visit your parents, you're going to take her with you? Asking questions like he had not thought about at all, right? And I was like, the bed in your apartment, I'd never been to his apartment. It's a single bed or a double bed? You going to buy a new bed? Like he's really flabbergasted about this. He hadn't thought about this way at all. And so I asked a series of leading questions. And what I said to him was, which he didn't see coming at all. He didn't see where these questions were leading or where it was going to. I said, you assume that you are going to do absolutely nothing for this woman. You assume that you are not going to change your life in any way for her. You are thinking about this woman like you're hiring her to come and clean your apartment and then leave. You're looking at this as a service that is going to come into your life and exit, leaving you unchanged, right? Like that's how you're really thinking about this woman. It doesn't even occur to you that you are going to have to change for her, that you're going to have to provide some kind of meaningful life for her, that you're going to live some kind of life together. Now, the conversation progressed, but my ultimate point was that I said to him, I mean, this, you got to be pretty good friends to say this to a man. But I said to him, look, on a really deep level, you think of women as prostitutes. You are thinking about these relationships in terms of like, how much money do you have to spend and how much time and effort do you have to spend to have sex with this woman? And then that's all it is to you, right? Now, this may seem like a huge leap from the Seinfeld TV show to this real life experience of this one guy, this friend of mine that, as you can tell, I was quite tough on, but it's not. The Seinfeld TV show shows you this one kind of narrow snippet of a man's life, and it gives you none of the woman's perspective, by the way. And, it shows you a few amusing dialogues between Seinfeld and the woman he's dating at the time. And you laugh at it. And then again, she disappears as inexplicably she appears. And it's always presumed that to some extent, the wealth and fame of Seinfeld makes it easy for him to have this series of relationships with these women. Okay, so that woman who should have, you think in her own life, she is not the main character in her story, as opposed to being a minor supporting character in Seinfeld's story. So this woman, I mean, we're talking about a fictional character here, but if this were a real woman in a real situation, so she's not thinking about having children. She's not thinking about her career and her education options and making different decisions for the man in her life and where you're going to live and what you're going to do together. Like there aren't long-term implications to this relationship for her and what it means for her. And like, again, in terms of having a human heart, like this person isn't a prostitute. She's being treated like a prostitute. She's just being treated as a sex object and then discarded. You think she isn't falling in love? You think this doesn't change the way she feels about herself and the way she looks back on the relationships she had in the past and the way she looks at relationships she had in the future? I mean, if you just think a few steps deeper about what the relationship means to both of the parties involved and what demands each is making on the other, I know these sitcoms, they tend to focus on the most shallow and trivial things, like whether or not you're willing to change the style of clothes you wear for the other person in your life. Any relationship, the books you read will change. The conversations you have about the books you're reading will change, right? Like, do you think this is trivial? I don't. Like just at that level, right? Like, this is really deep. So how far are you willing to go for the person in your life? I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the name out of my YouTube channel. There was a time a long time ago. So by the way, I've said before, I would love it if these kinds of questions could be, could be applied to non-sexual relationships also. That'd be great. But for most people, they never are. I had a friend who was just a friend. And I remember she was talking to me about a YouTube video I made at that time criticizing a particular spiritual leader. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the name. Doesn't matter. But at that time, I made a video. I'm an atheist, skeptical person. And this friend of mine, she's also an atheist. She's also a skeptical person. And she said, that she had read the autobiography of this guy. I think so. If not, it was some other book he read. And she said, actually, she saw a lot of value in his work. Now, I remember I sent her a voice message rather than text because you might not get the sincerity if it was just text. And I said, look, I've got to tell you, like, I did like 2 hours of research before making that YouTube video. I at the time I knew how many hours. Maybe it was 3 hours, maybe it was 4 hours, but it was not. It's like, look, I am not an expert on this guy, like this that I just made a YouTube video about. Let's say it was 4 hours. Let's be generous, whatever it was, But like, I read about this for a couple of hours and then put together this YouTube video, and like, like I don't know him. I don't know this spiritual guru, but I know you. And if you're telling me that his autobiography is worth reading, or this is meaningful and important to me, I'm willing to listen. Like I'm interested in what you find worthwhile about this. And I'm willing to do more reading. Like, maybe I'll delete my earlier YouTube videos. And, maybe I'll actually reconsider to that extent. But it's like, look, I take seriously, your perspective. Now, as it happened, the rest of the conversation didn't go that way. It was more of a situation where she did explain what it was she found interesting about the guy's autobiography. And it was kind of like, well, he comes out of this background, then he questioned that background, he took a new direction. It's like, there were some kind of human sympathy things there, but it wasn't something where I was going to, it didn't motivate me to read the book, and it didn't kind of totally change my view of this guy. It just sort of showed a more human, sympathetic side of this kind of cult leader, in my opinion. But the person I was talking to she was a secular atheist person. She was not a cult follower or a devotee of this guy at all. But my point is, like, if you think about this as just one little Lego brick missing from your life, and sometimes one person takes that position, and sometimes they're discarded, and a new person takes that position, right? This is a kind of fundamentally, unbelievably selfish and destructive attitude to take towards the relationship of your life. And what's really tremendously important is that instead you're open to the extent to which, simply put, you are going to be living your life for another person, and you are going to be living your life with another person. I mean, sorry, but I think that's a great example. Like, there's something like this cult leader. So I've read a newspaper article about the cult leader. It's just simple. I've looked up a couple newspaper articles, but now I'm talking to someone who's read a whole book and who knows more than I do, and who's a friend of mine, or you're in love with them, or whatever your situation is. Okay, and like I said, well, look, I don't know the truth, and I don't know him. I only know these couple newspaper articles I read. I read the Wikipedia article. I read the Wikipedia article and some newspaper article. I just did a little bit of research. Okay, so that's what I know. But if you know more about this, and if you care about it, if you have a perspective, okay, I want that to come into my life, and I want that to change my life. And maybe I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to read another article. I'm going to change my view, and I'm going to hear what you have to say. It's like, guys, that is not shallow. That is not a minor thing. And I think you guys can imagine easily enough. You're going to listen to this broadcast for an hour and a half. Melissa is talking to me 12 hours a day or something, like the influence I have on her life, her intellectual development, and the questions that are raised, and just reconsideration of things you might have taken for granted, right? When you really live with someone and really care about someone. And I don't know everything. Sometimes we talk about things I know nothing about, you know what I mean? The point is not that I know about everything or care about everything, but by involving the person in your life that way, you've got to be willing to change a lot more than just your furniture, I could digress. I mean, obviously it's possible to go too far. It's possible to be willing to change everything in your life and expect nothing in return. It's possible to be too self-sacrificing. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, I made a video about that years ago. Yeah, about 4 years ago. You can go too far to the extreme the other way. But what I see in this generation, for men and women alike, instead, is a big problem with the Seinfeld syndrome. Okay. Guys, if you have a moment, hit thumbs up, share the link if you want to. If you've got anywhere to share it with your worthless friends on Facebook and Instagram that you haven't talked to in years. I am glancing now at the comments, but if there's nothing particular to derail me, I'll continue on to the next point here. So one guy in the audience says that he's taking these principles and applying them to his platonic relationships. Richard, good luck with that. My experiences in life, that the platonic relationships that I have, nobody is motivated enough to really, to inconvenience themselves to really keep the relationship going. Pardon me. My point being, if someone isn't in love with you, will they really make the time? Will they really make it a priority to keep the friendship going? Now, if they do, that's great. I'm happy for you. I'm just saying, most of my experience in life, there's so many people I met. There are people I met and became friends with at Cambridge University, at Oxford University, in Bangkok, Thailand, in Nong Khai, Chiang Mai. I've lived all over the world, in France. There are people who could be my friends still today. And, they didn't make the effort, in that sense, they let me down. And then on the other hand, the people who do make the effort, very often there's something non-platonic there that's motivating it. But if you've got platonic friendships, that's a wonderful thing. And to some extent, just the geography of your life is a part of that. Brief digression. I know I've mentioned this before. When you're around Cree and Ojibwe people out in Saskatchewan, they really had this cultural expectation that they'd bump into you again. They're used to living in these small communities in remote parts of Canada where they'd say goodbye to you. And I'd be like, look, if you don't take my email and if you don't become my Facebook friend, if you don't connect, you're never going to see me again. They wouldn't get it. They'd be like, oh, yeah, I'll see you around. Yeah, no, great. They were real, and they were being sincere. They weren't giving you the cultural. Like for them, culturally, they really expected. Like they're used to growing up in communities where you can't get away from people. But we're minimum once a week, you bump into everybody who lives in that community. I remember I told my father about that, and he mentioned a small town in France he knew. I think he'd lived in a small town in France for 3 months or something, doing a project like for work. He'd been there for a couple months, and he said, he'd never been anywhere else where people would make an arrangement to see you by just saying, I'll see you tomorrow when I'm going to the bakery. Like no time, no location. But where you could meet every single person in town by sitting at the coffee shop that it was the crossroads in the middle. So, there are some differences. So to have platonic relationships in that, I was never in that small town in France. It's just something my father told me about. But in that small town in France or something, maybe that's different. But, you live in a big city anywhere. Melissa is from the greater Detroit area. You have to drive for an hour to see anyone, like just in a different neighborhood. And when I was in Los Angeles, I did meet up with some friends in Los Angeles. And when they got there, it's like, okay, how many hours did you drive to get here? Like for one or two people, the location I chose was a quick drive. Then for everyone, it's like, oh yeah, they drove an hour, they drove 45 minutes. Like people have to, it's a huge amount of effort. So yeah, if you're not in love with the person, are you really motivated to make that happen? Yeah. Turnvell says that it's been very hard for him or her to keep long-term friendships, with the exception being people he or she has known since middle school. Yeah, I don't want to get into a big digression of that, but Melissa and I talk about that a fair bit, that we have a culture where people tend to rely on just keeping friends they've had since high school or primary school. And I think there's a strange kind of weakness that comes into that individually and culturally, which is that they don't build up the capacity to make new friends as adults, which can be a very big problem. Okay. So, all right. This one's a little bit more critical in the pejorative sense. This is a little more blamey. Can we say that? Is blamey a word? No? Don't get defensive, guys. This one's a little bit more blamey. All right. There are short-term relationships that you're there are short-term relationships that you are intentionally and consciously pursuing as short-term relationships. There are long-term relationships that you are intentionally and consciously pursuing as long-term relationships. There are long-term relationships that fail and turn out to be short-term relationships. And there are short-term relationships that fail and turn out to be long-term relationships. Can you imagine the square here, guys? Short-term, long-term. Meant to be long-term, but turns out to be short-term. Meant to be short-term, but turns out to be long-term. You tell me if this is more of a problem for women or men in the current generation. I've known my share of both with this problem. A lot of people from age 18 to 25, if not 18 to 35, but for the crucial first quarter of their life, they say they don't want anything serious. They only want short-term relationships. And that's all they have, right? They don't try to have long-term relationships. And I think they really cannot imagine the extent to which they're sabotaging themselves. Because then whenever they switch to wanting a long-term relationship or marriage or having kids, or even if there's no kids involved, when they switch to wanting to have a more meaningful life and more meaningful relationships, they don't know how. They are in a much worse position than someone who from age 18 to 25 was trying to have long-term relationships and failing. Like if you have two people, and let's just say they both had 20 sexual partners. Is this too high? Let's say you have two people, and between the ages of 18 and 30, both of these people had 20 different sexual partners. But one of them, with each and every one of those relationships, was trying to make it like their long-term life partner relationship. They were trying. So what does that mean? They did the dishes together. They shined each other's shoes. They helped each other. They talked about job interviews and work. They met each other's parents all 20 times. Took you and introduced you to my parents. And they were trying to make it work as a marriage. Okay. That person has really been practicing. They've really been rehearsing and refining what it takes, the discipline of mind, the generosity of spirit, the type of cooperation, right, that's required to make a long-term relationship work and to have a meaningful life together with another person or with other people, plural, if you're in the minority who have some kind of three-way relationship, polyamory, open relationship, what have you. Because regardless, I mean, that's just at a higher skill level, really, if you have more than two people involved. But it's by trying to build long-term relationships, even if you fail again and again, that you learn to have long-term relationships. And there are all these people, there are no statistics, there are all these people who go from age 18 to 30, and even if they've had 20 sexual partners, every single one of them was declaredly or avowedly a short-term, low-commitment relationship. You didn't introduce them to your parents. You didn't really get to know them that way. You didn't really ever trust them. And trusting someone can lead to you having your heart broken and being disappointed. But you learn from that, and you take that learning experience and putting it into your next relationship, put it into the future, right? You didn't really trust them. You didn't really commit to them all the way. Again, even if that would end badly, right? And I know this is going to sound weird to some of you, but did you really do their dishes? Did you really shine their shoes? Did you really help them get dressed before they went to a job interview? Did you really talk to them about how the job interview went afterwards? It's totally different in a short-term relationship. Like if you were in a short-term, low-commitment relationship, you may not be aware of it, but like calls them up. Oh, we're going to meet up tonight? Right. You got that job interview. Okay, cool. Tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow at 6? Okay, I'll pick you up. You may not know, but like, okay, what if this is the person you're planning to marry, you're planning to have kids with, you're trying to make it work long term? It's different. Okay. And again, even if you fail, even if you're terrible at it, you'll learn that you're terrible at it, right? You'll have to adapt. Like, okay, all right, you're going to a job interview. How can I help? Maybe I help by just doing more of the dishes for a couple of days or something. You know what I mean? Maybe you help in some shallow way like that, but you help by talking to them about it, by caring about it. There's a lot to think about and a lot to agonize over with those decisions in life, and where you're really involved together, talking as if, as if this matters forever, and you're building up those skills. Turnbull says, quote, "I hope we do the hot, crazy matrix chart next." Turnbull, that is an obscure cultural reference that I have already addressed on my channel. So I don't know if he's saying that because he knows it or not, but I have already made a dedicated YouTube video on that very topic. So I could give you the link, but I don't know if I need to. Okay, Natasha, I'm going to get your question in just a second. ATL Richard says, quote, "I did not come here for you to explain my life's mistakes." How wrong you are, Richard. Well, look, so what I just said, I invited you to ask yourself what I was talking about here. Is this more true of young men or young women? It's easier for young women. Like if young women just want to have a sexual partner with no strings attached, with no commitment, that's more attainable for women than for men. Like they have to make less effort. uh, unless you're an extremely good looking or extremely wealthy man or something, for a man to go out and have a succession of low commitment short-term relationships. I just say it's more work. And I've known guys who live that way. I've never lived that way. I think I can use his name. I had a friend named Gregoire. He was French. What a shock. And I mean, he's one of the few people I've known. He probably had sex with more than 1,000 women, but if not, it was many hundreds. And I saw the way he lived, and I saw the time he put into it. And I mean, it was a discipline. It was it was work. Obviously he had sex with a huge number of women, and you could say, well, it's not that much work. Well, yeah, but I mean, for a good-looking woman to have zero commitment relationships, that might be easier. However, the stigma is greater for women. The question of self-respect is very different for most women. Not all. There's no gender essentialism here. But, obviously that guy I'm mentioning, Gregoire, it was very interesting to hear his perspective on the world. I mean, I learned a lot from him, though I did not want to live a life like he did at all. Obviously, his respect for himself only increased by sleeping with large numbers of women that he had no meaningful relationship with. And I remember talking about it. He really appreciated the questions I was asking, because I was already cagey and insightful enough to ask some questions. I remember talking to him about the significance of lying. I was like, yeah, but okay, but like you say, you have you don't hate yourself, like you're not crying yourself to sleep at night for sleeping around. But what about the lies? Doesn't it ever come back to you how you lied? Or what about the girl breaking down weeping? Whether it's the next day or the next week or the next month. What about when you lied and they figure out that you're lying and they break down weeping? I was asking questions like that, and he loved it. He loved being challenged. He was really happy to have someone, just cross-examining him about his philosophy and what it really meant in his life, And he was willing to have a laugh at his own expense. He wasn't thin-skinned about it, Yeah, so he had slept with an enormous number of women, and I just mentioned most of his career he was in the hotel industry. One way, I could tell this guy's whole life story, but I'm keeping it slightly anonymous. Honestly, I don't think he'd mind me talking about people. I don't think he'd mind if I told his whole life story, frankly. But working at hotels, he did meet women who were in town for just a few days, where there were short-term love affairs. But anyway, yeah. So this particular issue, it may be a little bit different for women and men in terms of the amount of work you have to put in to get the same outcomes. But fundamentally and profoundly, I do not think this is different for women and men. I think this is fundamentally the same, or it's only 5% different, or 10% different. All right. So so another good comment from Natasha first. Natasha says, quote, red pillars fear vulnerability. Yes, it's a huge issue. And it's a huge issue for women also. There are women who do not want to be vulnerable, and that leads to other decisions made by women. It's just not called the red pill when women do it. Okay, quoting Natasha. Natasha asks, Eisel, what are your thoughts about short-term relationships that are meant to be short-term that later evolve to be long-term by circumstance? In one word, tragic. Okay? Happens all the time. And you know what? You know what the most common reason is? It's pregnancy. One of my brothers had someone over to tour his apartment. We're like, I don't even think he was looking for a roommate. I think it was like he was going to leave the apartment and he had to sublet it to someone else. It was something like that. He invited someone over to tour the apartment, to take a look at the apartment before deciding whether or not she was going to rent it. They had sex on the floor. And the child that was conceived is a fully grown adult today. There was absolutely no basis for that relationship. They have nothing in common. No mutual respect, no admiration, no nothing. And the woman's situation was that she had already had multiple abortions. I forget if it was 2 abortions or 3. She already knew what it was like to have an abortion. So I forget. I'm sorry. But she had, as I recall, more than 1 abortion. And she said that she made herself a promise after the last time she had an abortion that she'd just never do it again. Well, there's something else you should have promised yourself that you'd never do again, if that was your perspective. And I'm out of touch with those people. I haven't been on speaking terms with any of my brothers for many, many years. But they were, those two, they ended up just hating each other. They managed to kind of cooperate for a couple years for the sake of the baby, but ooh, that got dark. That got really, really dark, that relationship. And, in case you guys are imagining this brother has anything in common with me, like intellectually or morally or something, no, he really doesn't. We might as well be two different species of mammal, frankly. I have nothing in common with that brother. He's not like me in any way. So yeah, I mean, that's my short answer then, Natasha. And I think again, there's a very interesting kind of self-sabotage. Let's take it all the way. So the question is, what about relationships that were meant to be short-term, but that turn out to be long-term? Let's talk about prostitution. What if a woman and a man meet because the woman is working as a prostitute and the man pays her for sex? And then, they get to know each other and get to like each other, and things change, whether or not she gets pregnant or whether or not there are other factors or something, right? I think it's always going to be tragic, and I think even if you go kind of the opposite extreme where it's, people who are on some temporary work assignment and they're just looking for a short-term fling while they're on vacation or while they're on this work assignment, I think it has more in common with prostitution than you might at first suspect. Short-term relationships meant to be short-term. And I'm not saying this to demonize prostitutes or Johns or anything else. We're all human, I totally demonize gambling. I totally demonize the drinking of alcohol. In the future on planet Earth, there should be zero gambling and zero drinking of alcohol. There are all kinds of things I'm totally morally opposed to. But, human sexuality is not something we're going to outgrow or overcome or eliminate. So, we do have to tolerate prostitution in our society, no matter how inconvenient or disturbing it may be in different ways. And how exactly you tolerate it legally is a big question in political science. What the best way to do that is to minimize other negative consequences. There's a lot to say there. But, without dehumanizing anyone involved in those short-term relationships, if you say to me that you think it's possible to just overcome that and have a positive long-term relationship as if it had been intended to be a long-term relationship from the start, I basically say no. I think it's really always going to be tragic. Yeah. Okay, so great question from Ron. This comes back to something I was talking about with Melissa off camera before. So Ron asks, quote, "My question for you and others in the chat, would it be preferable to be single, not have sex or be involved with anyone at all until you develop yourself?" So, there is this ancient saying in English, if you can't handle the orange peel, you can't handle the orange. And Melissa and I have talked about that lately. It's just come up in different circumstances, whether related to friends or politics or whatever it is, that, yeah, there really is a sense in which a lot of people need to make the hard decision that they can't cope with a relationship. They can't handle what's involved with it. So they shouldn't be in a relationship at all. Just one of the ones that came up is, well, at what point are you able to stand up to your own parents? So like, you have a new girlfriend or new boyfriend, you introduce this person to your parents, you introduce the person you're in love with to your parents, and they disapprove or want you to break up. If you can't handle the orange peel, you can't handle the orange. If you can't handle that, if you can't stand up to your own parents, you shouldn't be in a relationship at all. I'm not saying your parents are right. Whether your parents are right or wrong doesn't matter. If you aren't at the point where you can articulate these things and talk about them and stand up to your own parents about them, you shouldn't be in a relationship at all. And that's just one example. But I think there are a lot of examples where you can say, look, this is a kind of red line where this is showing that you are not ready to deal with this. And, what happens when you do something you're not ready for? When it comes to human sexuality, you're normally talking about trauma that mars your life for decades. I'm just going to be real with you. I mean, if you read a book and you're not ready for it yet, it's really not the same thing. You know what I mean? It's really not. Nothing else is human sexuality that way. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. And I'm sorry, any of you guys in the audience, we may have some young people, we have some old people here, but like there are things that you might have done at age 30 sexually, where if you had done them at age 20, they would have been horrifying and traumatizing and messed you up. I don't even say for life. It might have messed you up for 5 years. Like it might take you 5 years to get over it. You know, when you talk about people who are 35, they can go to an orgy and they don't care. I mean, there are so many, like you're so jaded and experienced by 35. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to stand here in the corner and smoke a cigarette while watching my husband have sex with another woman. And it's just whatever. There are all kinds of people who get to that at 35. But there are people who do that while they're in college at age 18. Most people, it's the opposite, right? They do all that stuff when they're way too young to cope with it. They're doing that at 18. And then, you know, at 35, they're boring and monogamous, you know? So like, there's all kinds of things that like, they wouldn't be traumatizing if you were ready for them, but people put themselves into a situation when they're not ready for them. And look, you know, the ultimate thing is just, you know, most relationships involve people screaming at each other, weeping, being dejected. You know, the greatest extremes of both happiness and sorrow happen within relationships, and sometimes for relatively trivial reasons. Give you a great example. You know, I had a blonde ex-girlfriend. She's been mentioned before. I never give her name. Lucky for me, I only have one blonde ex-girlfriend. I had a blonde ex-girlfriend, and we were going into a situation where I was going to go talk to a book publisher. These were the days. This is when I was going to publish a book. This is a million years ago. Book about Buddhism. I said, okay, I'm going to sit down with this guy and have a series of long meetings. I've already been together with this girl for years. Very attractive girl. I could go on about how attractive. She was a bimbo. Okay. She was really not intelligent enough to be with me. She really wasn't. And I was like, look, you know, I've taken you into a whole series of like business situations where like I was meeting my boss, I was in some kind of high pressure situation, or even when I took you to meet my parents, you know, and you have ruined it. You have done terribly. Like it's been a disaster every time. She would say something so stupid, I then have to dig myself out of a hole. It's like, you know what? When I'm sitting down with this guy and talking business about the manuscript, what I would really appreciate is if you leave the room and you don't say anything at all. You don't like, because I've already been together with her for years. I was like, look, this is a serious conversation with my book publisher. It's going to change the rest of my life. It would really be great if you didn't screw it up for me by saying something stupid like you've said in every single high pressure and professional situation I've ever been in with you. You know what I mean? And, you know, so the actual format where this meeting took place, it wasn't really in one room. I'm sorry, I could describe the whole situation, but it was a situation that was quite easy for her to kind of walk in and out of. Let's say it was an open plan office, put it that way. Okay. So, you know, it's not, yeah. So, you know, we meet the publisher, we have initial chit chat, talk about this and that. Actually, that conversation, that stage goes really well. I'm talking with this guy about politics and history and book publishing and research and where books are imported and exported from. At the time, I knew that kind of stuff. We're talking about importing books from India and things, various sort of things going on. And it's like, okay, let's sit down and get the business. So we sit down at something that's more like a boardroom table, and you know, my girlfriend takes off. And in the middle of this, and it's in quite a tense part of the negotiations, you know, about this book. She runs into them. She doesn't even walk. She runs into the room like a little kid and says the stupidest thing you could possibly say for no reason, you know, interrupting our conversation. And the funny thing was, before she said it, she runs and she says, "Oh, can I just say one thing?" And I said to her, "You know, I really prefer if you didn't. Like, we're really in the middle." And then she goes on to say, you know, and so this guy, the book publisher, you know, she bounces out of the room. She's a real attractive girl. She's a real good looking girl. She's at the time, she's in the prime of her life. And I mean, he's an older dude. He just knows. He's just sitting there. He's looking at me like, you like bimbos. Like, this is what you put up. Like, that is it. You know what I mean? Like he did say a few words to me. I mean, I forget. He said this is totally not what he said verbatim, but he said the equivalent. I'm like, yeah, that's quite a spark plug you've got there. So he said something witheringly contemptuous of like, yeah, I can see that you are a highly intellectual man who has chosen to have in your life a woman who is vastly inferior to you in terms of intellect and self-discipline. Like, yeah, no, yeah, it's a real, yeah. Yeah, he wasn't even saying I have bad taste in women or something. I think his perspective was like, well, I can see where your priorities lie, young man, yeah. And I remember when I got back to, I'm just going to simplify. I'll say our hotel room. The actual arrangements are more complicated, but we'll say it's a hotel room. I got back there and we're sleeping the night. I got back and she's there and she's sitting there silently. And she said, can we just not talk about this at all? Can we just never mention this? All right, so Ron Sims goes out on a limb here and admits something. Ron Sims says that he turned 30 just a few days ago and is still a virgin. He avoids the whole relationship and sex things because he is still not where he wants to be. Well, Ron, you got to learn how to do dishes. You got to learn how to do dishes with someone. You got to learn how to do dishes for someone. You got to learn how to live together in a, really positive way. Yep. Natasha says, talk about an incompatible relationship, exclamation point, lol. That's correct. Yeah, it was incompatible in every way, including sexually. The sex was really bad for me. It was great for her. I think I've never experienced that before or since, frankly, an asymmetrical relationship. It was an absolutely terrible relationship. I completely regret it, but I could also sit here and tell you exactly why I got involved and exactly why I got committed to it. And, for me, it meant so much just to have somebody to laugh with, just to have someone to tell jokes with during those years of my life. And, there was really nothing good in that relationship, but, yeah. And I gave that relationship 110%. For me, I was planning to spend the rest of my life with her. I was working as hard in that relationship as I would as if we were married and trying to make it work for life. I absolutely put 110%. And I got so much less work done on everything else in my life as a result, like all the hours sunk into that. But yeah. Anyway, yeah, but Ron, I'm just mentioning that about doing dishes because it's very easy for people to think that sex is the issue or attracting people is the issue, that these other things are the issue. And I'm just saying there is actually an art to how you live with someone day by day, how you share an apartment, how you share your life. And that's something you're not practicing. So obviously, sex itself, it's a skilled art in its way. But yeah, I'm just saying there are these other things that are less often talked about that also really matter. Okay, so the last thing, which could have been first, and it's tremendously important, is this. And guys, you can tell me if you relate to this or not. If you think of your life as a series of circles, so you've got a circle for your career, you've got a circle for like your intellectual life, which may be your education or what you're interested in personally, your own self-development or what have you. If you have, you may have a circle separately for family. Not everyone does. What is your family life? If your life is separated into circles in this way, that may be intellectual, maybe emotional, maybe aspirational. I know people overuse that word now. You may have different ambitions that form different circles in your life. Like for me, I had a circle in my life for humanitarian work for years. I had a circle in my life for vegan activism, for trying to change the world through this particular type of political activism. But you may have a circle in your life for being a film critic or something too. There may be some particular thing, like even if you don't earn money doing it, and of course you may have a very important circle for earning money, and these things. If you think of sex as just one more additional circle that's outside of these things, I really do think that's a crucial reason for why you are not getting laid, right? Now, all these things, in terms of my numbered list of issues I've gone over in this video, I think a lot of people might respond to this video and say, well, really, you're talking about things that become problems after the relationship has started. And what I'm saying here is no, I'm not. The way you think about your potential relationships in the future, the way you think about your own actual relationships in the past, it shapes the way you interact with others. It shapes the flirtations you have and don't have, and what comes next in them. When you think about sexuality not as a separate circle or a separate interest, something supplemental to and outside of your career, your education, how you're developing intellectually, and your family life. When you think of it instead as one circle in the middle that overlaps with all of them, right? It leads to very different relationships in your life, short-term and long-term. The way that you talk to people, the way that you involve people in your life is very different, short-term and long-term. Now, I think the easiest example of this to relate to is family. Even though many people in the audience may not get along with your family, you may not think that introducing people to your family is a great idea or is very enjoyable for them, for your family, for yourself, etc. But it's the one that's easiest to visualize. In Canadian culture, in American culture, I think I can say that the assumption is that people sleep together. This is especially urban United States of America. You may have sex with a person. You may be having sex with multiple people while not telling each of them about the other. You're having low commitment or no commitment relationships. And then there's some point at which that short-term relationship is promoted into being serious enough that you introduce these people to your family, that you include them in your family. What I'd point out to you is that many people also sabotage themselves in the same way by saying, okay, this is just a person you're pursuing sexually. This is just a person you're going to have sex with, but you're not introducing them to your intellectual life. You're not introducing them to your career. You're not involving them with these other things in your life. And it would be very different if you involve people in your life that way from day one. And as I say, I'm not here giving advice about how to conduct a relationship after you've begun it. I'm actually talking about your attitudes before the relationship has begun. Some of you are going to relate to this, some of you aren't. Whether you think of this as a man or a woman, I think this applies to men and women exactly the same way. If there's someone you think is hot and you meet them at the workplace, or you meet them at the university, but there's someone you meet and talk to every so often, maybe you know them at your gym. I don't know what's a good example. Maybe the gym is the best example, maybe the worst. So every so often you chat with this person at the gym, and you are just looking at them and you are just talking to them, thinking that you want to have sex with them and that you want to incorporate them into your life as a sexual partner in this separate circle, this separate category for sexual partners, right? Obviously, this relates to some extent to the Seinfeld syndrome, talked about earlier. Every conversation you have with them, and literally even how you look at them, is different than if you were looking at them as a whole person, and that you were presenting yourself as a whole person, and you were talking to them in a way where you're going to integrate them into your whole life. Now, okay, so some of you guys, maybe you'll have to think about this after. Maybe you can think about it right now. Can you think about times when you were hitting on someone, you were approaching someone, you were sexually trying to initiate a relationship with someone, whether you think of that as seduction or first conversation? Okay, did you mention anything about your family? Did you, I'm not saying it would be the main thing you talk about. Did you include your family life in those conversations? Or were you consciously or unconsciously kind of anonymizing yourself? Kind of presenting yourself as an anonymous sexual partner because you were thinking of that other person as a kind of anonymous sexual partner also, as just fitting into this circle, into this category. And look, guys, I understand. There are people for whom that works. There are people who go to swingers clubs and go to mask parties, and they never know anything about the people there. I understand there's a tiny minority of the population who prefer completely anonymous, dehumanized, and dehumanizing relationships. That is obviously not what I'm addressing here. Also, if I give you guys fitness and weight loss advice, that is not intended for people who are already Olympic athletes. You know what I mean? And, for the tiny percentage of the population who prefer relationships that are both dehumanizing and, where they themselves are also dehumanized, you may imagine that's the most gratifying and satisfying life to lead. If you know any of those people living that way, they weep into their pillow often enough. That has its own tragedies. That has its own travails. But I'm saying that already from, step one, already from the first step of the first conversation, the way you present yourself, the way you talk about yourself, the way you present your own life, and the way you ask them about their life. It's profoundly different if you are relating as the whole person and the whole life to that other person, the whole person and the whole life, and not as, okay, this is this separate circle, this is this separate thing in my life, where, you're trying to kind of sync up with them and play a game, where you are only going to know them as a sex object, and they are only going to know you as a sex object. Now, okay, again, I was kind of expecting more people to respond to this in the audience. I don't know how you feel about this, guys. You can tell me how you feel. One reason why people do this, one reason why they try to have a separate compartment, a separate category, right, is the fear of vulnerability that came up, before in the chat, right? One reason why people try to have this separate category and try to, again, extricate it from their intellectual, emotional, family life, career life, and everything else, right? Like, and people will say explicitly, look, I don't want you to be involved with I don't want you to know my coworkers or colleagues, or I don't even want you to know about what I'm doing with like some people will say that their relationships, that no, they want to just keep this a separate, compartment in life. One of the reasons people do this is the fear of rejection, right? Like, okay, if this person really knows who I am, if they know about my career, my education, my intellectual life, my family, or something, they're gonna reject me. So I have to anonymize myself. I have to sort of play this game, sort of be this other person, right? And of course, an alternative to both of those attitudes is to realize, right. But the vulnerability, that's exactly what you have to get over. And that's exactly what this flirtation, interaction, this relationship, like it may be a failed relationship, but this attempt at a relationship, for better or worse, the one way you could absolutely, certainly benefit from this relationship is precisely by dealing with and overcoming your vulnerability, precisely by sharing your real life and who you really are with the other person, and by inviting them to share their own life and who they really are. That's a benefit you're definitely going to get, even if nothing else works out in the relationship, right? And in terms of fear of rejection, right, you have to learn to embrace being rejected for the right reasons, right? Like, okay, well, I don't gamble. If this person is a gambler, there are people who go gambling every weekend. That's their regular thing, is they gamble on the weekend. Okay, well, like if I reject them for gambling and I feel that's for the best, I got to know this person and then, there's this thing and then I reject them, I have to be able to accept reciprocally that there's something about me, which from their perspective, it's a good and wholesome reason for them to reject me. Like you have to learn to regard the rejection positively. Now, of course, by the way, guys, if you've lived with gossip, people used to gossip. It's amazing how people used to gossip about me. Still, anyway, I was talking about the other day. I mean, there were bored people who really talk about you behind your back. And it's kind of mind blowing me. But it is tragic if someone rejects you because someone else made up a lie about you. I mean, someone else could say that you're a gambling addict and actually you don't gamble at all. Someone else made up a story. Of course, there are situations where rejection is really tragic. It is really sad. And, I mean, that's also part of the human condition. But within the context we're talking about here, if you get rejected or you reject someone else because you're sharing who you really are, in all these different ways, you have to accept that as positive. And maybe you can still just be friends with this person. Maybe you are still colleagues or something else, but again, so these are benefits you can get definitely, whereas the other benefits of a relationship are probabilistic, and many of them really are quite improbable. Okay, guys, so for me, that's a wrap. I'm looking at the comment section. I feel that I've completely exhausted my audience. Melissa, anything you want to jump in on? I mean, we were talking about a lot before I got in the microphone, things related to this.
No, I think it's good.
Okay. All right, guys, We're all mammals. We're all products of millions of years of evolution. But the reason why I talk so rarely and so little about evolutionary psychology is that I do not think, evolution defines who we are. I don't think it provides us with a limit, and I don't think it provides us with a sense of purpose or direction. You know, what is the purpose of your relationship with another person? I remember I gave the example some time ago on the channel. You can have such a tight, close relationship between two people who run a convenience store together. You're a married couple and you run a convenience store. There was a time when I was imagining my relationship with Melissa being that we'd run a bakery together, where every day you do this work and it brings you together and you cooperate. Of course, a newborn infant, this is another type of very intense, all-consuming work and responsibility where you have to work together, But, what the meaning of your relationship is, or your relationships, plural, are, why you're pursuing this relationship, and what it is you're trying to get out of it, and then the unexpected things you get out of it you weren't trying to get. I'm sorry, but just give an example. Exactly the things that you might reject someone for could end up making the relationship more enriching. Like someone is a bumpkin who grew up in the woods in a small town, living in the remote countryside. But by bringing them into your life, you gain that perspective and you learn how they see things, and you never saw it that way. Like that's not why you like them. That's not what you liked about them. But that becomes, this whole discussion has been very heteronormative, and there have been references to getting married and having kids. Of course, if for you the point of the relationship is to do cancer research together. If for you the point of the relationship is to, be a creative artist, you could be a pair of filmmakers together, work together on films. That was how the first Star Wars got made. You guys may or may not know this. I think that only the very first Star Wars film was any good, and then he divorced his wife. He never made a good film after he divorced his wife. I seriously think that George Lucas's wife was the talent behind the first Star Wars movie, But you could be filmmakers together and not have children, There are all kinds of other reasons, to be in a relationship, But my reason for making this video, and the reason why I feel this is positive, this is a really positive, encouraging, motivating video and not a contemptuous one, is that I think, as shallow as the title of this video might seem about getting laid, right? Getting laid can be and should be part of leading a meaningful life. Getting out and saying, what do I have to share with someone else? And what do they have to share with me? And what can we be together? And who can we become? Who can I become and who can she become, right? Living our lives together, asking ourselves these questions, holding each other to a higher standard. The way in which you provoke and motivate each other to live more and learn more and so on. Getting laid destroys many people's lives. Innumerable people, their lives are destroyed by these, inborn instincts we have, right? But what I'm doing in this video and on my YouTube channel, it generally is emphasizing the extent to which this could be a tremendously positive, part of your life and of someone else's life. And where even if your relationships fail, even if they fail again and again and again, you're able to look back on that relationship. You're able to look back on each and every relationship you've had in your life, and you're able to say, this is how I became a better person, and this is how she became a better person also, by going through that chapter of her life.